Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. New information released on the closed hearing of the so-called Doomsday cult couple. What defense attorneys for Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell told the judge and not the public. Plus, potential jury members are already being contacted in the trial of the former officers accused of murdering George Floyd. The questions prosecutors and defense want to know now, months ahead of the trial.
Do not point that gun at my children!
A fired COVID-19 scientist fires back after agents raid her home. Why she's calling their search warrant a sham. And the family of a Texas man killed by police are outraged by an officer's actions. What the newly released body cam video shows.
This shooting was unnecessary, unconstitutional, and unjustifiable.
Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmire along with Terri Austin. New information in the case of the Doomsday cult mom, Lori Vallow. But first, the jury questionnaire is out in the George Floyd case, and we have it here. Potential jury members in Minnesota are already being asked questions for the upcoming trial of the 4 former police officers. Questions like, list all details you know about the victim and defendants. Have you watched the video of George Floyd's death? And if so, how many times? Did you participate in demonstrations against police brutality? Did you or someone you know get injured or suffer property damage during the protests? Part 2 of the questions focus on media habits, including what is your primary source of news? How often do you see news updates on social media? Part 3 is about police contacts. Have you ever personally seen the police use more force than was needed? Have you ever been restrained or put in a chokehold by law enforcement? Then, the potential jurors asked to rate their opinions in a lengthy list about how they feel towards the media, discrimination, and trusting police. The 16-page questionnaire was mailed to citizens in Hennepin County. The trial is expected to last 3 weeks. Jury members will be sequestered during deliberations. Jury selection is scheduled to start on March 8th and could take 3 weeks. The trial is scheduled to start on March 29th and could take another 3 weeks. The judge is expected to decide at a hearing next month whether to grant the defense's request to delay it until July. Joining me now is criminal defense attorney Nicole DeBorde and Terri Austin. Nicole, as a defense attorney, some questions I feel have to be asked in person so you can see that person's body language as they respond. How do you see jury selection working in this type of format?
Well, I think this is really just a start. This case is obviously so emotionally charged and is so public that the lawyers and the court really need a head start in terms of finding out who has already formed a very solid opinion about what should happen in this case.
Yeah, and this could probably really weed out people to begin with, like Nicole is talking about. Now, Terri, do you see this as the future for jury selection or just necessary for the times considering we're during COVID-19?
You know, I think it makes a lot of sense to have these questionnaires filled out from a distance. I mean, yes, you're right. It's wonderful to be able to see how a prospective juror responds to the question. You want to look at whether or not they're telling the truth, their body language. But it is helpful to have them sit and ponder these questions, maybe answer them more thoroughly. So I think this is going to be around for a while, partially for COVID, but I think it's going to stay around because it might make some sense.
Yeah, and of course, I think, Nicole, you were kind of hinting at as well, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like this might just help weed out those people who are really not meant for this trial off the jump and maybe make it easier for that 3-week jury selection that's coming up next year. Thank you guys for your input.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, this is going to be a huge challenge to get a group of jurors to consider the facts of this case who don't already have a very strong opinion about what they think should happen without knowing the facts. And so they're trying to find out who those people are to make sure that the ones that they do pick have a fresh start and have a clean slate.
Absolutely. And now to another of our top stories. Terri has the latest on the Lori Vallow Daybell case.
Brian, the judge overseeing the case has just unsealed records of a closed-door hearing, and we're learning a lot of new information. Vallow and her husband, Chad Daybell, are charged with concealing evidence related to the deaths of Vallow's 2 children. The bodies of 7-year-old Joshua J.J. Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan were found on Daybell's property. Defense attorneys for the so-called Doomsday cult couple accuse prosecutor Rob Wood of witness intimidation and want him removed from the case. It relates to a call Wood had with Vallow's sister and sister-in-law. Wood says he did nothing wrong and wants an expedited hearing to clear it up. The couple is due back in court on January 6th. Brian?
Terry, January 6th seems to be a big day. Arguments on whether Wood should be removed from the case and whether there should be a change of venue. Any thoughts on how those arguments may play out?
I think that Wood is not going to be removed from the case. First of all, he said this, that the attorney was there during the interview. He was just speaking preliminarily, and the investigation was done by investigators and not him. So I think the judge is going to rule in his favor and keep him on the case because I don't think he interfered. As to venue, there is probably no other county in the state where someone has not heard of this case. So I think the venue will not be changed either.
Thanks. Now, Nicole, the beginning of this saga, the cases were pretty intertwined in the defense's arguments. They seem to be splitting apart a little. Do you think that's foreshadowing of what's to come in the trial?
I think that's a great point. Really, when things get tough, sometimes what you see are the defense teams that had previously been unified starting to separate and pick their own path. And certainly that can create a very damaging scenario for one of the defendants. And I have no doubt that both of these accused will do what they can to improve their own personal situation.
Yeah, especially when the bodies of these two young children are found on Chad Daybell's property. I can't imagine that Lori Vallow is going to stick by his side too long from a legal standpoint. But of course, we'll keep eyes on that. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, the latest on singer R. Kelly's criminal prosecution and when his many trials are scheduled to begin. But first, Florida data scientist is suing the state why she's calling a search warrant on her home a, quote, sham. After the break. The now fired Florida data scientist is suing the state after agents executed a search warrant on her home. Rebecca Jones is accusing authorities of terrorizing her family earlier this month in retaliation for not falsifying data. Jones was terminated from her position working on the COVID-19 dashboard at the Florida Department of Health. The warrant reportedly was in response to a complaint of an unauthorized user sending a message to employees urging them to, quote, speak up before another 17,000 people are dead. Jones posted videos of the raid inside her home to her Twitter account.
Come outside. Outside.
Who else is in the house, ma'am?
My 2 children and my husband.
Where's your husband at?
Calm down. Calm down.
You want the children down?
Call them all down.
Mr. Jones, come down the stairs. Now!
Police, come down now.
Search warrant.
Bring your
Come down the
children.
stairs.
My children!
Hang on, let me clear the
He
house.
just pointed a gun at my children!
After Jones posted her video, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement released body cam video of the warrant.
To the door, now.
Open
Open the door.
Open the door, ma'am.
Matt, Albert.
Open it now. Come outside. Outside.
Who else is in the house, ma'am?
My 2 children and my husband.
Where's your husband at?
Calm down. Calm down.
You want the children down?
Call them all down.
Okay. There is no need for this at all. I'm going to explain everything to you about why we're here, but right now we're off to a pretty rocky start. All you had to do was answer the door. There was no doubt who we were.
Veteran SWAT member and crime analyst Lisa Lockwood reviewed both of the videos at the request of the Law and Crime Network.
When you gather intel for a search warrant, you realize that there will be children on the scene, and you take the necessary precautions for that. And you could hear her scream out, "They're pointing a gun at my child," and that wasn't the case. The officer came to the door, and when you ascend a staircase and go around a staircase, you have to look up the staircase and make sure nobody's up there, and you have your gun drawn in a particular way in order to look at the threat. And there were no children at the top of the stairs. And one of the things that Rebecca alleges later on in a countersuit is a battery, because it's the job of the police to make sure that you don't have a weapon. So they did search her. And when you have a male police officer doing the actual search, they can only go so far. They touched her ribs and they touched her sides. And doing that to look for a weapon, I don't believe is enough to warrant a battery against the police officer.
Back with me for legal analysis is Nicole, DeBorde, and Terri Austin. Nicole, when you look at these videos, are you seeing any legal issues or just an angry citizen whose home was raided?
I'm seeing an angry citizen whose home was raided. You know, the police officer's job is not to evaluate whether or not the warrant that they were given by a judge is based on correct legal information. It's to go through the correct procedures and execute that warrant. And I didn't see anything outside of what we would expect to see in the service of a warrant on either of these videos.
Agreed. It seemed pretty common based on the videos that I've seen from my own clients here in Brooklyn. Terry, Jones is arguing, which I think is true, that an IP address can be faked. Is that something officers should be checking before executing warrants or not?
I don't think they have to necessarily check that because I don't think it's their responsibility, but I do think they should know that the IP address could be fake. And so, in my opinion, I think that, I'm not very tech savvy and I know that. I just think that the response was a little bit extreme. I don't think they should have come in with guns. This was an email. She didn't threaten to, blow up the company, and the email could have come from other people. So I just sort of think that the response was a little bit extreme. I don't think Jones really has a real case against the police, but I do think that what they did there was more than they should have done in a situation where, there's an email like this.
Yeah, oftentimes when I look at body-worn cameras, these types of search warrants and arrest warrants, they draw their guns because the person they're going to look at either has guns or drugs or a history of violence. This isn't the case, so while they might not have broken any rules, it's kind of peculiar to draw guns in this type of situation, but we'll talk about it more later. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, the family of a man killed by police officer react to body cam video of the shooting. Plus, Bill Cosby reveals he's refusing to shower in prison and barely leaves his cell. Why the convicted comedian says he's remaining hopeful next. A federal judge has set a new date for R&B singer R. Kelly. R. Kelly is now expected to go to trial on September 13th of 2021 for federal child pornography and sex crime charges in Chicago. Two previous trial dates have been pushed back due to the coronavirus pandemic. Prosecutors say the singer filmed himself having sex with underage girls. He's also facing charges in Illinois and Minnesota, as well as federal charges in New York. The New York trial is scheduled for April of 2021. Sex offender, former actor and comedian Bill Cosby says he's very hopeful his conviction will be overturned. In an exclusive interview with the Daily Mail, Cosby revealed he stopped showering in prison after a COVID outbreak and spends 20 hours a day in lockdown. Cosby was found guilty of sexually assaulting Andrea Constant in 2018. He was sentenced to 3 to 10 years and could be released as early as September 2021. The Pennsylvania State Supreme Court heard arguments earlier this month on why his defense believes he deserves a new trial. Attorney Gloria Allred represents 33 accusers, 3 of which testified against Cosby at his second trial. She told me she's confident her client's testimony will be affirmed.
He has consistently said he feels no remorse. He's not essentially taking any responsibility because he says he's innocent of what he was convicted of, 3 counts of aggravated indecent sexual assault. So whether, if he's showing no remorse, whether the parole board will in fact grant him parole, I don't know. I think my client just wants justice to be done. So we'll have to see what form justice takes, if any.
Now, Nicole, we watched the hearing. Do you see any reasons for Cosby to be hopeful in his appeal?
The best time to win your case is at the trial court level. By the time you're arguing these finer points at the appellate level, the hope has dwindled. And certainly it's his last hope, so I can understand why he's hanging on to it. But I think it's a difficult hurdle to cross for him.
All right, we'll definitely keep eyes on that. Terry, I keep going back to Cosby's defense attorney saying 5 uncharged witnesses testifying was prejudicial, and she knows that because in the first trial, he was not convicted. Could you see him being hopeful, or do you agree with Nicole? Not much reason to be hopeful here.
Well, I agree with both of them. I think that, he probably will not win. But on the other hand, the argument went well for him. And it sounds like the judges are kind of leaning towards not, listening to the argument that it wasn't prejudicial. I think having 5 witnesses who testified might have been prejudicial. And they looked at the fact that the trial court judge only allowed the one witness in the first trial and 5 in the second trial. And you know, in Pennsylvania, they're going to only being allowing these witnesses if in fact they can demonstrate a signature pattern of abuse. And I'm not certain all 5 of them fit the same pattern. So we'll see what happens. But I think that if he has any hope of winning on appeal, it's on this very issue.
Quickly, Nicole, I see you kind of nodding your head. Agree or disagree with what Terry said?
Totally agree with Terry. This is a strong issue, and it's his strongest hope for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have many shots to make here, but I think this one is probably the only one that may, not saying it will, but will make it. Thank you, Nicole and Terry. When we come back, newly released body cam video shows the moments after a fatal officer-involved shooting in Texas. But what happened before? Our expert analysis after the break. The family of a Texas man killed by a police officer says the shooting looked more like, quote, a drive-by than a legal pursuit. 22-year-old Joshua Feast was killed on December 9th. According to the Lamarck Police Department, Feast had 2 outstanding felony warrants. Officer Jose Santos was reportedly monitoring Feast's home for an investigation into recent drive-by shootings. Officials released the officer's body cam to the public. It shows Santos in his car and Feast exiting the passenger side of the vehicle. Santos says he saw Feast turn towards him holding a gun, so he fired 1 round. Investigators report Feast was positioned with his backside towards the officer at the time he was shot. The first 30 seconds of the video that capture the shooting are silent due to a manufacturing setting. The audio begins as soon as the officer hits record.
Show me your hands! 41, we're in front of 1010 Purtle. Stage medics. First unit to get here, I need you to recover the gun. He dropped it just outside of Dodge Charger. Stay on the ground, do not move. He pulled out a gun. He got a couple felony warrants. He pulled a gun on me. When I get supervisor here, I'm gonna need y'all to determine if we need to bring the medics in or carry him out. All right, let's put him in cuffs.
Feast's mother says the body cam video is disturbing and is calling for an outside investigation into the officer's actions.
This is the hardest thing I ever went through. And it hurt me to see that Officer Santos let my son bleed out on the ground after he begged for help. He kept asking for help. And then after he took his last breath, he was even handcuffed. So, like I said, it's the hardest thing that I have ever experienced. My grandkids, Alea and Josh Jr., they don't understand that their father is not coming back. Even if you say he's gone, they still think he's coming back.
Attorney Benjamin Crump represents the family and is calling for the officer's dash cam video to be made public.
The sheriff gave an interview on CBS. And in that interview, he told the reporter that his investigators said the body camera video showed Joshua Feast coming in the direction of Officer Jose Santos and pointing a gun at him. Nothing that the investigators told the sheriff that would be exhibited on that video was there. So the question is, why would they lie? When you watch that video, it's more like a drive-by shooting instead of a legal pursuit of a suspect.
Terry, we've been here before. We look at the video, we hear the claims. They don't seem to mesh very well. What should we be focusing on here to get to the truth?
The video, based on the video footage there, I don't think that there was reasonable force here. I mean, deadly force is only supposed to be used by a police officer if they reasonably believe that the subject poses, a significant threat of serious bodily injury or death to themselves or others. And here, clearly, we saw that Joshua was running away. He wasn't running towards. We did not see him pulling a gun. And so clearly, this isn't a case of where the police officer thought he was threatened. And I am really concerned by the fact that they did not offer any sort of medical assistance and that they put him in handcuffs. Clearly, he was bleeding out there. They didn't need to use the handcuffs. This needs to be investigated.
Good eye on that, not calling medical support right away. Nicole, this happened about 40 miles from where you are in Houston. How is your Texas community reacting, and what do you think the next steps are going to be in this case?
I think the next steps are going to be a very thorough investigation, and it's very possible that more than one agency will be involved in the investigation. The video does raise some difficult points. It's a difficult video to watch, and I think it's going to be important to know whether or not there was even a weapon found. Was there anyone who captured any kind of video that even demonstrates that any part of the officer's statement was correct? I think we have a lot more information that we're going to be receiving over time as this investigation goes on.
Absolutely. I mean, we've been here before. You've got a statement by the officer. You've got body-worn camera. Thank God we've got that so we can compare and contrast and see what actually happened. But if it is, as we have seen, that this individual, that he's running away and shot in the back without a gun being pulled out, we'll see how that plays as it goes on. Thank you, Nicole and Terri, for joining us. And thank you for joining us here at Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.